El tema en el día de hoy será política exterior estadounidense, nuestro mundo convulsionado. Antes de iniciar formalmente, quisiéramos agradecer a los patrocinadores del Círculo Élite que hacen posible el encuentro del día de hoy. Estos son Citi, Bepensa, Claro, Humano, Jaina International Terminals, Martí, Square Patent Box, Inicia, Barrick Pueblo Viejo y Pasteurizadora Rica. Nuevamente, muchas gracias por este encuentro. Les informamos que en sus mesas encontrarán nuestros formularios de preguntas y respuestas, donde ustedes podrán anotar las preguntas que deseen realizarle a nuestro orador invitado y huésped de honor luego de su ponencia, después del almuerzo como tal. En las redes sociales en el día de hoy estaremos utilizando un hashtag muy curioso, hashtag Mundo Convulsionado, así que les invitamos por favor a que puedan compartir sus tweets, sus fotos del evento del día de hoy y cualquier tipo de información que consideren relevante en las redes, se nos pueden encontrar ahí. Y bueno, sin más preámbulos, vamos a recibir ahora al señor William Malamud, vicepresidente ejecutivo de la Cámara Americana de Comercio, que nos va a dar un poco palabras de bienvenida y nos presentará la mesa principal en el día de hoy. Lo recibimos.
Bueno, distinguidos integrantes de la mesa principal, estimados miembros del gobierno y cuerpo diplomático, miembros de la prensa y medios de comunicación, damas y caballeros, apreciados socios, muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a este almuerzo mensual de la Cámara Americana de Comercio. Acabo de regresar de una conferencia en Miami de la Asociación de Cámaras Americanas de Comercio de América Latina y el Caribe, ACLA por sus siglas en inglés. ACLA tiene 23 AMCHAMDRs en la región, representando más de 20,000 empresas. A través de la red de AMCHAMDRs podemos ofrecer a nuestros socios acceso a oportunidades no solamente en los Estados Unidos, pero todo el hemisferio. Y con el US Chamber estamos trabajando para fomentar economías de mercado, Estado de Derecho y integración económica al nivel hemisférico. En Miami, el tema central de la conferencia era cuál es el futuro de la globalización en general e integración regional, tomando en cuenta los cambios en la política comercial de los Estados Unidos, la economía más grande del mundo y arquitecto de las instituciones creado para administrar y promover mercados abiertos y libre comercio. Oímos de los embajadores de Chile, Colombia, México y Perú y su compromiso de seguir para adelante con la Alianza Pacífica, una estrategia de integración regional y con miras a vínculos más estrechos con las economías de Asia. También oímos de representantes de los grupos de trabajo del sector privado quienes están preparando para el CEO Summit of the Americas en Lima. El CEO Summit es el foro empresarial más importante de las Américas, donde los CEOs y jefes de Estado de la región van a analizar oportunidades para promover inversión y crecimiento económico a través de alianzas públicas-privadas. En resumen, aunque hay incertidumbre sobre la estrategia y políticas de los Estados Unidos, hay un consenso que la integración económica es imprescindible para la prosperidad y crecimiento económico. Más aún que debemos ser alineados y proactivos para asegurar acceso a las economías dinámicas de Asia en una manera que es justo y equitativo. Para entender mejor la política extranjera de los Estados Unidos, lo que ha cambiado y lo que no ha cambiado. Somos sumamente afortunados y honrados tener con nosotros como orador invitado y huésped de honor el embajador Frank Wisner, un diplomático de carrera retirado con décadas de experiencia en temas geopolíticos. El embajador Wisner va a compartir con nosotros su visión de la política extranjera de los Estados Unidos en su exponencia Política Exterior Estadounidense, nuestro mundo convulsionado. Nuestro programa en el día de hoy es primero la presentación de la mesa principal, seguido inmediatamente por el almuerzo y después del almuerzo nuestro presidente David Fernández va a presentar a nuestro orador. Y después de su presentación el embajador Wisner ha cedido a responder a preguntas de ustedes en el público. Hay formularios en la mesa favor de escribir en una manera que yo puedo leer. Y ahora, sin más preámbulo, es mi honor presentar nuestra mesa principal, comenzando con Eduardo Cruz, miembro de nuestro consejo y presidente ejecutivo de Humano; Alejandro Peña Prieto, pasado presidente de AMCHAM y socio de Squire Patton Boggs; Stephen Puig, miembro del consejo y vicepresidente ejecutivo y gerente general de BHD León; Fernando Villanueva, miembro de nuestro consejo y presidente del Grupo Viamar; Gustavo Tavares, pasado presidente inmediato de AMCHAM y presidente de Marítima Dominicana; Ramón Ortega, vicepresidente de nuestro consejo y socio de PricewaterhouseCoopers; Robert Copley, encargado de negocios y jefe de misión de la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en la República Dominicana; David Fernández, presidente de nuestro consejo y presidente de CXO Consulting; el honorable Frank Wisner, asesor en asuntos internacionales de Squire Patton Boggs y ex embajador de Estados Unidos en el Medio Oriente, India, y nuestro orador y huésped de honor. Y tenemos el Nelson Toca, ministro de Industria, Comercio y MIPYMES de la República Dominicana; Roberto Herrera, vicepresidente de nuestro consejo y gerente país de InterEnergy Holdings; Carlos José Martí, miembro de nuestro consejo y CEO del Grupo Martí; y María Waleska Álvarez, miembro de nuestro consejo y presidenta ejecutiva de NAP del Caribe.
Para dar las palabras de bienvenida y un poco de contexto, y al mismo tiempo para presentar a nuestro orador invitado y huésped de honor, vamos a recibir al presidente de AMCHAMDR, el señor David Fernández. Adelante.
Distinguido señor Frank Wisner, asesor de Asuntos Internacionales y ex embajador de los Estados Unidos en el Medio Oriente e India, y orador y huésped de honor en el día de hoy. Distinguido Nelson Toca, ministro de Industria y Comercio y MIPYMES. Estimados miembros del Consejo de Directores y pasados presidentes de la Cámara Americana de Comercio. Autoridades, ejecutivos y miembros de la Cámara, representantes diplomáticos y miembros del Círculo Élite, representantes de los medios de comunicación, invitados y público en general. Muy buenas tardes. Para la Cámara Americana de Comercio es un honor recibirlos nuevamente en este encuentro, especialmente después de haber cumplido 174 años de independencia como país. Un año más de historia nos llena de orgullo y nos motiva a continuar trabajando por el bienestar económico y social de esta gran nación, autora vislumbrada por nuestros padres y arquitectos de la patria. El impacto del acelerado cambio tecnológico sobre cómo trabajamos, cómo competimos y cómo interactuamos social y políticamente no tiene precedente en la historia de la humanidad. Estamos viviendo un momento de profundo cambio en la forma en que las empresas se estructuran para competir, en la manera en que los estados se organizan para mantener el orden interno y en las instituciones a través de las cuales estos estados interactúan entre sí. Para sobrevivir y prosperar en estos momentos tumultuosos, es importante entender la dinámica subyacente que impulsa estos cambios. Y eso es justamente lo que hemos estado haciendo como Cámara y lo que nos reúne hoy aquí. El pasado jueves 15 de febrero, la Cámara Americana de Comercio y el Ministerio de la Presidencia firmamos un acuerdo institucional dentro del marco de la iniciativa República Digital, en la que sentamos las bases de una cooperación continua en el desarrollo de actividades, programas y proyectos en materia de cultura digital, comercio electrónico y seguridad cibernética. Esto es importante, pues surge ante la creciente apertura y globalización de los mercados y las constantes innovaciones tecnológicas que caracterizan el nuevo escenario económico mundial y regional. De igual forma, participamos ese mismo día en el panel Expectativas del sector empresarial de la República Dominicana sobre la reforma y modernización de la administración pública, realizado por el Ministerio de Administración Pública. En él propusimos la revisión de la estructura fiscal del país para garantizar un control en el gasto público a través de la aprobación de una ley de responsabilidad y transparencia fiscal. Hoy tenemos el privilegio de tener con nosotros al diplomático Frank Wisner, quien compartirá con nosotros sus pensamientos y perspectivas sobre lo que está impulsando el cambio en la arena geopolítica y cómo la política exterior de Estados Unidos se está adaptando y moldeando a un mundo cambiante. El título de su discurso es Política Exterior Estadounidense, nuestro mundo convulsionando. Frank Wisner es diplomático senior, empresario estadounidense y ex embajador de Estados Unidos en India, Egipto, las Filipinas y Zambia. Su carrera política abarca 4 décadas y 8 presidentes de Estados Unidos. Tras graduarse de la Universidad de Princeton en 1961, se unió al Departamento de Estado como oficial de servicio exterior. Su primera asignación fue en Argel inmediatamente después de su independencia de Francia, y luego se trasladó a Vietnam, donde pasó 4 años en el apogeo de la guerra. De 1982 hasta el 86 se desempeñó como subsecretario asistente adjunto para asuntos africanos en un momento de intenso compromiso diplomático en el sur de África. Además, fungió como director adjunto de la Fuerza de Tarea Interinstitucional de Indochina, la entidad responsable de evacuar y asentar a casi 1 millón de refugiados. Además de su papel como embajador en 4 países, se ha desempeñado como subsecretario de Defensa, como subsecretario de Estado para Asuntos de Seguridad Internacional. En el 2005, la entonces secretaria de Estado, Condoleezza Rice, asignó al señor Wisner como representante especial de la Nación para las conversaciones sobre el Estado de Kosovo, en los que jugó un papel crucial en la negociación de su independencia. Y el 31 de enero del 2011, el expresidente Barack Obama lo envió a Egipto para negociar una resolución a las protestas populares que barrieron el país contra el régimen de Mubarak. Actualmente trabaja como asesor en asuntos internacionales en la firma Squire Patton Boggs en Washington, D.C., donde provee asesoramiento global estratégico sobre negocios, política y derecho internacional. Damas y caballeros, nos sentimos honrados en recibir a nuestro orador invitado y huésped de honor, el diplomático senior, destacado embajador, el señor Frank Wisner.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Fernandez, I'm enormously grateful for your introduction. Sadly, I am not able to speak such beautiful Spanish, and I hope you will bear with me while I deliver my remarks in English. David, first of all, thank you for receiving me today and for your very complete recitation of my biography. I'm more impressed that all of you sat still while David went through it. Enormously grateful to you. Mr. Minister, a privilege to sit next to you at lunch today. It is a huge treat to have a chance to meet you with the responsibilities you carry. I also want to signal the presence of our very distinguished Chargé d'Affaires, Robert Copley, who is here. Being a graduate of the American Diplomatic Service, I owe my respects and good wishes to you, Robert. But most of all, I'm honored to be in Santo Domingo, to visit the Dominican Republic, and to be a guest today of the American Chamber. I've always wanted to visit the Dominican Republic. I've always wanted to have a moment in my life to relax and see the beautiful sights of your land. But I regret to say that my somewhat long diplomatic career never afforded me an opportunity either to serve in this country or in Latin America and the Caribbean. I spent, however, my life as an interested and close observer, much more than a participant, in the elaboration of American policies toward this region. My career began in national security affairs, almost coterminous with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which defined a key moment in the Cold War and shaped American thinking for a generation and a half. I was associated later with Henry Kissinger when we sought to contain the Cuban military's adventure into Africa that risked the spread of the Cold War to a new continent, and I played a long and useful role, I hope, in convincing both Angola and South Africa to bring that intervention to an end. I was present in President Carter's administration, at his administration side, and Secretary Vance, when the Mariel crisis broke loose. Many of you will remember it. But it marked also the beginning of a very long and frustrating road to the normalization of our relations with Cuba. And I was with Secretary Vance at the G7 summit in 1979 when he sent instructions at President Carter's request to tell President Somoza in Nicaragua the time was up and he had to leave office. So I had much that I thought about throughout my career about your region, perhaps none more important than in the early 90s in the Defense Department in managing the Cuban refugee crisis, and then our intervention in, the Haitian refugee crisis, and then our intervention in Haiti. But whatever my association or the lack thereof with the Dominican Republic and Latin America, I argue with you today that no American knows his history and cannot be unaware of how closely linked our two countries are, for we are bound by ties of blood, commerce, shared values, and political interests. Dominicans, as all of you know, are the 5th largest Hispanic community in the United States, and our mutual commitment to democracy, to the rule of law, to religious tolerance, free markets, define what we're all about, our objectives and our values. I'm also pleased today to be able to visit you on behalf of my law firm, Squire Patton Boggs, which is so active in the Dominican Republic and is ably represented here today by Alejandro Peña Prieto and Pedro Gamundi. We also have with us several of our partners, Rina Martinez, Carolina Soto, Stefan Adel, and Vivian Pena. We are, as many of you know, heavily engaged in your energy, financial services, tourism, real estate, and labor and employment matters, as well as international dispute resolution. We are present not only in the Dominican Republic, but throughout Latin America, and around the world we field about 1,500 attorneys and are present in 20 countries. You at the Chamber were kind enough to receive me in Washington and allow me to speak about the evolution of American policy under a new administration. Policy towards Latin America and the Caribbean, and potentially as well towards the Dominican Republic. At that time, we were in the very, very early days of the Trump administration. And even if I argue, as I will today, that American policy is still in transition, I can argue equally we are in early days, and much lies ahead, and much will affect the course of our relationship with your country and with this region, and will affect your lives as business leaders. I will argue that despite occasional perceptions of disagreements between the United States and this region, or charges of indifference, American policy is rooted in American interests. And while they may be modified on the margins, there is a constancy in our view of our ties to your country, this part of the world. I want, therefore, to begin with several observations. The United States, at the moment, is fortunately in the midst of a major economic recovery, and it is a strong recovery. Indeed, it is already so strong that we have to begin to contemplate the dangers of inflation. And I'm pleased our good fortune reflects itself on you and your interests. But while I am optimistic about the American economy, I'm deeply troubled about the world's current political and security situation. Consider, as Americans must today, the problems presented by North Korea, the Middle East, and relations with Russia and China. The risks, ladies and gentlemen, of miscalculation that could lead to war with North Korea and in the Arabian Gulf, those risks abound. And none of us in this hemisphere would be safe from the consequences of global crisis. Hugely serious to someone like myself, who devoted my life to American diplomacy, is the impact of the United States under President Trump's presidency on our image in the world. And I have to say, the image of American standing in power is diminished. We don't face a new Cold War, but we Americans have to be honest with ourselves and admit that we've lost influence, and that has consequences for you. Our decision to withdraw from TPP, call NAFTA into question, threaten to tear up the Iran nuclear deal, radically alter our policies towards Israel and Palestine, have all added a great deal of uncertainty, indeed of risk, in a world that is struggling to define a global order in the face of multiple centrifugal political, social, and economic forces that have been at play ever since the end of the Cold War. Confronted, as we are, by deeply troubling global events, you would be right to ask if Latin America and the Caribbean have slipped off the American radar screen. Let me assure you that's not the case, even if our policies towards your part of the world tend to be episodic and not as strategic as they should be, or as I would wish them to be. But they continue to be in transition. Clearly, the exceptions are too numerous to count. The situation in Venezuela preoccupies Washington. It has the makings of a crisis of hemispheric proportions. Equally forthcoming elections in Mexico and Brazil add uncertainties. If Mexico elects López Obrador and chooses radical political policies antagonistic to the United States, and should he choose to sharpen differences which Donald Trump has already provoked, we are headed for serious trouble. I hate to think about the consequences to the Mexican-American relationship if the NAFTA talks break down. So the consequences of that, plus a radical government in Mexico, the threats to the region would be grave. I'd add as well of issues to be concerned about the forthcoming elections in Brazil. They're extraordinarily unpredictable, and given Brazil's massive role in the hemisphere's affairs, we will all be affected by the decision of the Brazilian voter. We in the United States also keep a careful eye on Russia, which is returning to the region with a political view that it's out to undermine American influence and standing. China, on the other hand, is a relatively new arrival in our hemisphere, but its aggressive investment program, unencumbered by the rules of the road that govern workers' rights, sound governance, environmental considerations, add an additional cloud to our definition, our United States definition of interest. Let me remind you of words that Rex Tillerson, our Secretary of State, recently stated about Chinese economic expansion based on debt, where around the world nations choose to acquire a great deal of Chinese debt, they compromise their access to world capital markets. And they also find themselves in a position where the conversion of equity, of debt into equity, which is more often the case, ends up compromising national sovereignty. So these are real issues. Chinese investment's important, and it answers the needs for infrastructure in our hemisphere and beyond, and I believe present a major challenge to American policymakers, for every country needs investment in infrastructure. But if I go on a bit more, I have to mention something that should be of concern to all of us, and that is the current threats to the liberal, international, and democratic order in Europe and elsewhere around the world. For the principles of that order have defined political and economic practices in the West, in our region, in your country, since World War II. And they are today, unfortunately, under a generalized attack. But having traced a picture of some concern, let me say that I personally, taking a step back and looking at Latin America and the Caribbean, see a materially different picture than the one I grew up with and knew even in the recent past. The economies of this region are growing and doing so at a respectable pace. Our hemisphere exceeds, trade in our hemisphere exceeds $2 trillion annually and yields a $14 billion balance in the United States' favor. The Dominican economy is one of the fastest growing in Latin America and the Caribbean region. With the end of strife in Colombia, no wars beset our region for the first time in decades. No tidal wave of refugees confront us as it confronts the Mediterranean countries. And with the exception of Venezuela, political ties inside this hemisphere are healthy, as was demonstrated recently in the Vancouver summit and will again in Lima this year. Of course, all of us face the same problems: the demands of poverty, the calls for a better environment, criminal behavior, corruption. But the bedrock of relations between the United States and all nations to our south are strong, they're enduring, they're growing. Our culture, our economies, and our values, our blood ties bring us together and make us stronger. And you can count on that for continuity in America's posture toward your region, whatever else happens. But that leaves us with some specific challenges. And let me touch on a couple of those before I bring my remarks to a close. First, we can take heart from the economic growth that we are experiencing and the growth in trade that we benefited from. We're living in halcyon days. But wisdom lies in caution. We have to keep our eye on macroeconomic facility so that growth continues and trade expands. It is important to keep a sharp eye out for inflation. It's also worth remembering that this is a time in which nations wisely bring down debt so that they are able to respond when economies go south. So an imperative for central banks and governments is to manage past debts so you have ammunition for the future. It is also important to keep an eye on trade. The debate over NAFTA teaches us that we have to pay very careful attention to our trade agreements and not let their terms atrophy. CAFTA has been good for all of us. It needs to continue. It needs to be stronger, and it will be renegotiated, and it needs to be done skillfully. Mr. Minister, I know that you and your government will do that, and I wish you well. And then we have episodic problems in the trade front we have to manage. I'm worried personally today by the threat of the imposition of steel tariffs by the President. The second issue that preoccupies me, and I would suggest all of us, is the fight against corruption. For no greater cloud hangs over the economies and politics of our region than the blight of corruption. It will be an immediate issue in the elections in Colombia, in Mexico, in Brazil. It is a matter of great concern in this country. The Odebrecht scandal poisons politics in Brazil and the Andean region, and corruption fuels López Obrador's political campaign in Mexico. I believe, and I suspect all of you do, that business is a key partner in the fight against corruption, and the fight itself offers an opportunity for businessmen to display their civic credentials as well as their self-interest. Adopting best practices in contracting, supporting good candidates in progressive political and civil society organizations are all smart moves for business. Your government was wise to associate the Dominican Republic with the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which is the gold standard worldwide for the mining industry. And your new bribery and money laundering laws are steps in the right direction. And government's moves to protect intellectual property are most welcome, particularly in my country. Mr. Minister, thank you for your careful accounting to me of the work being done to digitalize the acquisition of business licenses and tax payments in the Dominican Republic. All of that helps deal with the problems of corruption. But third, corruption feeds crime and drug trafficking, and elsewhere in the region, the clandestine trade in arms. I'm delighted our administration, President Trump's administration, remains strongly committed to the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, under which the United States has spent over $400 million since 2010. It brings the United States, CARICOM, the Dominican Republic together in a collaborative attack on narcotics, illegal arms, and it professionalizes judicial processes and law enforcement. It's important to you. Drug trafficking is a blight in all our lives. The Dominican Republic certainly doesn't want to have the reputation of being a drug hub. Fourth, immigration. Immigration is important in our relationship, given the huge population of Dominicans in my country and productive they are. The debate over immigration rages in the United States, and its outcome in the form of legislation is not clear. And I know that subject matters to all of you. Our Senate recently failed to pass an immigration bill. At issue are many questions: the Dreamers, Trump's much contested border wall and border security, questions of chain migration, and even the flow of normal immigrants, skilled and unskilled. But let me give you one piece of good news. The American political House wants an immigration bill. What form it will take, I can't tell you. The Dreamer issue drives it and has stirred the country. And most importantly, Speaker Ryan in the House is strongly behind the achievement of a bill. So I think a compromise is possible this spring. I'd be very worried if we don't get it, for it would enter, the question of immigration would enter our political debate for the 2018 congressional races. In any case, I personally am concerned by the shift in the American mood on immigration. I believe my country is a stronger nation, true to our origins, respectful of our economic needs, when we pursue a flexible and generous immigration policy. But that, sadly, is not the case today. Fifth, let me touch on the vexing question of Venezuela, which daily slips into chaos and presents a huge challenge for our entire hemisphere. No question in front of us demands a more consistent, coordinated political and humanitarian approach than Venezuela's current plight. The administration in Washington follows a political and not a military course, using sanctions selectively against the great malefactors of Venezuelan power. Nations like Colombia, which are receiving Venezuela's hungry citizens, all deserve our support, and all of us must signal our common purpose to welcome Venezuela back into our community of democratic nations once its present regime is gone. Like the US, the Dominican Republic should be clear: we will help Venezuela get back on its feet. It's too important to all of us. In Cuba, the Trump administration has slowed, but let me assure you, not reversed, the long overdue course of normalization between Washington and Havana. Cuban leaders, at the same time, have been very cautious about accepting change in the island's political and economic order. But pressures for change in Cuba will surely grow, and all of us need a strategy to cope with that nation's many needs when the time comes. For the present, such strategy doesn't exist. Haiti is another example. Your neighbor has not recovered from the natural catastrophes of recent years. Its economy is terribly weak, its governance is fragile. Haiti may be out of the emergency room, but it's still in the recovery room of our regional hospital, and it will remain there for some time, needing the help of this region in particular and the international community in general. We choose to forget Haiti at our peril. So, energy will be my last topic. Let me share a brighter note. Energy costs to this point in our history and the history of your region have been a brake on your regional economic performance and on growth. But I am excited about what lies ahead. Region-wide, $70 billion in energy generation investments are on the horizon. The American shale revolution has important consequences for everyone. You can look to the availability of North American low-cost, clean fuel for your energy needs in the years to come. And I am confident that LNG will flow immediately. At already 37% of our LNG exports come to this region and to Latin America. I personally am privileged to be party to a new corporation, C1, which is holding discussions with private power producers gas liquid marketers and your government to provide low-cost fuels to your country. The C1 formula promises to produce compressed natural gas at roughly half the price of current fuels that are being provided. We are currently in the process of negotiating access to your country's markets to gasify the economy and to be able to provide the liquids that you need for your economic performance. Project financing is well underway in its promise, and facilities and contracting arrangements with Caribbean regional economies will take place as each enterprise enters into arrangements with the mother company. Because of the bridge fuels that are currently available, we can begin to see supplies as early as 2020. This, I want to argue with you, is an exciting prospect, for it means the costs of production will drop and the standard of living in the Dominican Republic will be positively affected. Energy cooperation, ladies and gentlemen, reminds me once again of how closely the future of the United States and the future of the Dominican Republic are bound. That relationship, I believe, is truly our great inheritance and the promise for our future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that view from 40,000 feet. The air's pretty thin up there. You'd mentioned, some of the trends going on in the world. I mean, there's in Russia, one of them is the rise of authoritarian governments. I mean, you've got Russia, China. In Europe, you've got Hungary and Poland. In Turkey, our NATO ally, another move towards authoritarianism. What's driving that? Is there a common thread that's driving that shift towards authoritarianism?
No, I think that's a hugely important question. I tried to refer to it in my remarks when I said that the liberal international order that we grew up with is currently under assault. And I had in mind exactly the point you're making. I remember in the early 1990s, I could pick up my newspapers and read quotations from Francis Fukuyama's treatise, The End of History, as if the end of the Cold War meant that we'd entered an automatic age of democracy, of free markets, of the rule of law, of religious tolerance, but clearly we have not. And the question that vexes us today is why we have seen such a regression. In part, I think the answer lies in the ability of our institutions in a high-speed information world to provide our citizens in all categories with a sense of betterment in the present and promise in the future. There are major segments of our economies that are not prospering. And with that, a sense that the power centers of our Western economies, the Washingtons, the Londons, the Parises, the Warsaws, forgot about the people that they were elected to serve. And the reaction is ironic, for the very strong men that you pointed to, in almost all cases, were elected or accepted by overwhelming popular majorities, proving that democracy without strong institutions can actually end up being repressive. So we are in a very interesting and important time. I will argue with all of you in this country, given your history, what you've been through, your best interests, like my best interests, are served by standing by the values we believe in. But, and here's the big question, we have to be careful, for questions of equality rage deeply in all our societies. The blight of corruption undermines the authority of governments. If we don't give people a sense that government looks out for their interests, we will lose mandate, and that mandate will affect our commitments to great common values.
Thank you. I'm sure you're familiar with the Monroe Doctrine, and then there was the Kerry Doctrine in 2013 saying that the period of the Monroe Doctrine is over. How would you characterize U.S. policy towards the region with respect to outside powers, encroachment? You've mentioned, there's aggressive investment on the part of China, but is there any type of a red line in which, it's very clear on what the U.S. will not accept in the region?
That is also a deeply important question. At one level, I think we're going through a huge transformation that Americans still ill understand about our position in the world today. It's changing. I am not an advocate of America in decline. I don't believe it. And I hope none of you do, because I don't believe it's accurate. But adjusting American power to shifting global realities, that's a different matter. We have to be ready as a nation, not overreact to competition. We do in our ordinary lives, our business lives. So Latin America will be a zone of competition. And as long as that competition respects basic rules of the order we just talked about, I've got no problem with it. If it doesn't, then I think it's in all our interests, not just American interests, to stand up. If Russian intentions in this region today are to break America's influence or to destabilize political communities or to intervene as they are today in Mexico's elections to cause instability, that must be opposed. If the Chinese want to invest and beguile recipients with cheap terms, we'd better be careful about how we advise recipient countries before they break their ankle, and offer alternatives. I tried to say in my remarks, if I'm discouraged by one fact, is we don't have the energy and wisdom to come up with ideas like the Marshall Plan. There is today a possibility of bringing American, Japanese, European capital together with this region's capital to be able to provide financing alternatives to Chinese investment that overlooks workers' rights or environmental standards and still preserves the sovereignty of borrowing nations. So I think we got our work cut out for us, and I look to leadership to get smart about our choices, for they're in all of our interests.
Next question is also related to investment. I don't know if it's out of your wheelhouse or not, but if you could comment on the impact or potential impact of the recent U.S. tax reform, how that might impact foreign direct investment flows into the region or out of the region.
I wish I could had a crystal ball. I don't think you can answer that question today. I can see positive and some negative consequences. It would be a very negative consequence, Mr. Minister, if your government decided you should slash taxes and at the same time have a very high debt level. That would leave you dangerously exposed the next time we see a downturn. And downturns follow upturns as night follows days in modern economies. So the example of our cutting taxes needs to be thought about very carefully. Very few nations have the flexibility to add trillions of dollars to their debt burden and still survive. And it does require macroeconomic, calm, sensible policy. So that's a negative side. On the positive side, there is no doubt there will be more money for investment. And the more investment, the more demand for goods and services. The more money there will be available for leisure. The more money there will be available for capital markets as well as individual corporate investment programs. And all of those features could affect you positively. So I'm going to wait a bit before I answer that question. I think it's too early to have a full answer.
So you promise to come back in 2 years and...
If you'll have me. I'll stay longer next time.
In your list of challenges that to U.S. policy in the region, or facing the region and U.S. policy in that context, I didn't hear, and maybe I missed it because I was writing other things down, but the subject of climate change. How do you view climate change at a global level, but particularly for the policy implications for the United States in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, I didn't mention...
And remembering that we're on an island right now.
I didn't mention it for two good reasons. One, I didn't want to go on any longer and lose your attention. But second, it's a global question. I deeply, deeply regret, I have to be honest, I've been a servant of my government, but they're not everything I agree with. And one of the facts that I do not agree with was our administration's decision to disassociate itself from the Paris Agreement. And while that is yet to take tangible form, and you are seeing the most interesting reactions in the United States by states, cities, to meet Paris criteria, the fact that we don't have that leadership from Washington is really harmful to my nation's interests. None of us need kid ourselves. We are in an age in which climate change affects all of us, no more than nations like yours that are sea-surrounded nations. And therefore, it almost is imperative on us, whatever happens in Paris or not, what happens in Washington or not, it falls to all of us as individuals, as local, national governments, and to businesses to act as good stewards of an economy, of an environment that we increasingly understand is very fragile, and to exercise restraint and to meet and exceed negotiated standards done on an international marketplace. I think that falls to every one of you. It falls to me.
In the final question, DR CAFTA, you'd mentioned that we should expect a renegotiation or a revision of DR CAFTA, but a big question hanging out there is when, because you'd mentioned in your remarks there's elections coming up in Mexico, and the original calendar for negotiations of NAFTA, we're way behind schedule. When can we expect that to be wrapped up, and then, or if it's going to be wrapped up, and then what will there be to negotiate with the Dominican Republic?
Wow. Well, at this moment, I really regret my colleague Frank Simolis left the room. He's the expert, and I really don't know. I do not know of a date that has been selected for a renegotiation of a relook at CAFTA. I think it's out there and it's not far away. And I was pleased, Mr. Minister, due regard to you, sir, that you're thinking very hard about it and recognizing the advantages. But very good news for me was word about a subject that seems to preoccupy my White House, and that's trade balance. And you can certainly point to very positive outcomes for the United States in the trade balance. But you need to be ready to fight hard. And fight hard for increased market access in agriculture, in services. So I can only wish you well. I certainly will be cheering for a new CAFTA-DR, CAFTA. It is the great legacy of a wonderful man, Charlie Rangel, and it's been to all of our advantages. I hope we can see it through, but I just don't have the fine point answers you need.
I don't think there is one, but anyway, thank you very much, Ambassador. Un aplauso
Thank
para
you.
nuestro orador. And thank you all very much. Muchísimas gracias a todos y que pasen buenas tardes.